This image is actually not mine. It was a poster that advertised one of my first major multimedia pieces titled Made in USA, which I did in the late 1960s and then toured around in the very late 60s and early 1970s. The piece consisted of 6 slide projectors that were manually operated, along with 3 movie projectors that again were manually turned on and off, and 2 tape decks, 2 stereo tape decks with 4 channels of sound that I had to edit so that they would run close to synchronous as I could get them, usually pretty good. And the soundtrack was quite complex. It utilized sound from the 1960s, the events of the time, which I then mixed together and manipulated utilizing Moog synthesizer and some very early electronic music that I created. So this is well, here is one of the images of President Johnson that was created by printing, actually optically printing, no, not this, in this case not optically printing, but combining black and white images that were shot off the television screen, then printing them onto a material called color key, and then sandwiched together. The sandwiching of images, slide images, had started in late graduate school work and then really continued on. Here is another image of President Johnson, and of course he was one of the key figures of the time that drew lots of negative attention, but the piece was not intended to be a didactic, simple anti-war message. It was rather to give a feeling of the tenor of that time. And so in a sense I referred to it as an impressionistic image, or an impressionistic approach to showing conveying the feeling of that time. In this case, there was also a time of racial tension, and in this image I actually had taken 2 separate photographs, or actually color slides, and then very carefully cut with some scissors around the images in the 35mm slides, and then recombined them together into one piece. Again, to give a suggestion of that reference to the difficulties, the tensions of that time. Here again, another piece that indicates that same kind of interest. Obviously, it was a time when militarism was rampant and a great deal of tension with the, sorry. Again, this was a time of great tension during the Vietnam War. A lot of interest in, I shouldn't say interest, a lot of diatribes going back between pro-war, anti-war, and any indication of the flag at that point was to some a red flag and used to decry the war. And of course, those pro-war pro-American. That was a symbol of obviously of patriotism and their support of the traditions in the country. I, of course, was against the war, but never certainly against the individuals involved in that. And again, my view was that it was a way of making a kind of a statement about the feeling of the time rather than to simply take one position that was wholly negative. This kind of image, of course, was probably the most powerful and most disturbing, because here, obviously, a man with a baseball bat, his rather clear message, leading, I don't know if they were Cub Scouts or what kind of group they were, but encouraging them to decry the anti-war protesters. And by the way, on both sides, the plainclothesmen from the Civil Affairs Unit kind of bracket that picture. Very, very disturbing image, and obviously a very disturbing time in our country's history. Here again, another image, kind of pro-war. This was taken in Chicago at Grant Park when Allen Ginsberg was performing against the war during the 1968 convention, Democratic Convention. And obviously a number of these folks were very likely involved later on in the conflict with the Chicago police. Now this was an image that was taken in Philadelphia, and kind of putting together both the irony of the flag, the racial content, and kind of the ominous look of what was going on. But also one has to keep in mind that this same kind of image was taken not just because I was trying to put together a notion of the politics, but rather very interested in the whole notion of the graphic, very very boldness, the different kind of look of an image. The next large-scale multimedia piece that I did was titled Cycles, with a very different flavor about it and a very different intention. It was a time when I was a father, had 2 children, and I really was at that point more interested in, it's essentially about my children's future, or at least my concerns for their future. It did integrate a lot of different kinds of imagery. Well, let me just talk a little bit about this. This presentation used, let's see, a total of 14 projectors. There was one section that had 8 images that would change, all controlled by a paper punch tape, and then 2 sections rather of 3 images across that were dissolved one into another. So the first 8 were simply literally like cuts from one image to another. The other 2 sections were dissolves. And this was photographed at one of the, I think this was a presentation at the Moore College of Art in Philadelphia. It also utilized 4 channels of sound, but unlike the Made in USA presentation, this actually used one 4-channel tape with, so everything always stayed in sync, and also utilized a sub-audible pulse to advance the projectors. So it was totally automatic, and where Cycles was a 30-minute piece, this was actually an hour-long. There was actually a 15-minute prologue section, and then the 8-image section followed by the 2 3-image sections projected. The screen was a canvas screen that was 10 by 30 feet in size, and a kind of a format that I've always liked and has continued in a lot of my recent works, both image works and in video. But I had a great deal of help from a former student, actually in Cycles, or rather in Made in USA. One of my former students, a photographer who came into his own and has done just a huge body of beautiful work, David Lieb. And then for Cycles, a lot of help from a former student, Jeff Bott, who really was a wonderful companion coming along doing when we did our various road trips, and it was really a great help and a great person. This is some more of that approach, utilizing very wide angle image and the camera close to the ground to completely change the one's perspective and to give a sense of that time. And to me, again, I've been interested in the drama, or at least creating a drama out of something that initially is quite mundane and really doesn't have a particular drama attached to it at first, but it was certainly an approach that I felt resonated with what I wanted from an image, so that the very formal graphic elements have their own drama. The content is there as well, and that's something that I think has been very important to me, is that even though a lot of the imagery that I've worked with has been quite formal in some regards, that there's also woven into that been a whole matrix of meaning that I've been continually interested in. This image was photographed in Miami Beach, and I've utilized, as you can see, the colors in this are quite intense. I used a specialized microfilm that had very saturated colors and shot with that considerably, again to extend beyond the direct event and to try and intensify what the event, whatever that event would have been when I was shooting. In Philadelphia, the Mummers Parade was was and continues to be a very interesting, dynamic place to photograph, and particularly in the 70s, 60s and 70s, was a pretty wild affair. So there were all kinds of things happening, a lot of shall we say, uninhibited behavior on the street, people oftentimes imbibing a bit too much and so forth, but a good opportunity to photograph. This was actually an image that was not part of Cycles, but was part of a much later piece called Mystery Street. And that actually was a multi-image piece, but done totally on the computer. One of my first more adventuresome pieces utilizing the computer in I believe 1989, 1990. And this image was taken in New Orleans. The title of the piece, Mystery Street, is actually named after a street in New Orleans, which actually, ironically, I didn't photograph on, but seemed to bring together some of the feeling of that time. Apologize for going back and forth, but this image actually was from Cycles. And again, I chose to utilize ways of masking images to kind of bring out a more graphic element, but dealing with conflict, and again, in that piece, concern with the kinds of conflicts that my children would be experiencing later on. I also continued to photograph people at various events, and that certainly was a part of the interest that I continue to have when so moved to actually photograph in those kinds of events that that kind of give you a little more freedom than today. Street photography is a very different experience. One could take great liberties. In the 1960s, people were not sophisticated and used to seeing images, photographic images. Today, people are much more reluctant to let a camera into their private space, and understandably so, I must say.